Thank you. Right, we'll start again. Good morning. Thanks for turning up and thanks for being quiet. We're more than quiet, are we not? We're over the 11, which is very welcome. We'll go through the first three items quickly. Apologies for absence. We've got one at least, haven't we, Hannah?
We have. Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillors Fitzpatrick and Councillor Road.
Thank you. No more that we want to pass on? No. Declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests? No, thank you. Possible exclusion of the press and public? The academic, that, isn't it, really? But there would have been no reason anyway, I don't think. Minutes of the meeting held on 23rd of September. Does anybody want to wish to raise anything there? Okay, thank you. Chair's comments. We'll just talk about the question time, which is the once a year when we get to scrutinise the activities of the mayor. Who has the responsibility? What's the budget? Angela, how much is it? 300 million, 400 million? What's the combined authority budget?
The combined authorities probably spend about 500 million a year, but the mayor also has responsibility for policing funds, which is separate, but that's part of her remit also.
So here we are, the selected members of the public, as it were, to scrutinise £10 million a week. The chair's coming at 10 past. We have some draft questions that Carl and I and Jeff and Hannah have evolved over the last week or two. What we propose to do is, at the beginning, we'll just ask questions about where we were, subjects that were raised last year. I'm going to ask about devolution. Jeff's going to ask about, to take up the part of the point about soft power and partnerships. And then we're going to get on to what you might call the main central issues of the year, which are inflation and the economy and the effect of inflation on gain share. And David and Samantha are going to interrogate on that one, I hope. And there's some draft questions, but ask any question about it. And because we have two lead members on the subject, it doesn't mean anybody else can't join in. We definitely want everybody to speak, please. And then impact of inflation on projects and programmes. Again, we've got contributors. How does inflation affect the mayor's prejudice and plans? I mean, 18 months ago she had a distinct and presumably well-costed plan, which is not likely to be delivered on present levels of inflation. And then how does levelling up apply to us? Is there anything to tell us on equality, diversity and inclusion? And that is enough to keep us going for a couple of hours, I suspect. At the end of it, if there is time, I've got one or two other minor questions I'll ask at the end. I particularly want to ask what the mayor's impressions are 18 months in rather than 6 months in. But we'll do that towards the end so we don't get involved in high policy and where it's detail and the effect of all that's happening on the ground. Has anybody got anything they particularly want to raise under the questions to the mayor that we've not just mentioned now? It's all about inflation. No? But, all right, yes.
No, I'll ask it.
You will join in, yes, please. Yeah, we'll encourage everybody to join in. Good morning.
Morning.
I think you know us all. We've all got names. The names on both sides, so you can have it, right?
It would be super helpful, Chair, if we could just respond to face us. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then I can see councils as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're not going to wait. We'll carry on. Jane's just gone to get some coffee. Come on. What we intend to do is first begin by talking on two things that carried forward from 2021, and then on to the central issues of where we are now, which are, you'll not be surprised, inflation and the impact it has on all the activities and the budgets and the gain shares that we're all responsible for. So I'll start on my first question, but that doesn't mean that we want supplementaries, please, from anybody who wants to contribute. Has there been any progress or change in devolution of planning powers? You know, the government produced a white paper, but are we any close to having greater independence and control on planning in West Yorkshire?
No.
This is not going to take long, is it? Do you anticipate any? Do you, or the Chief Executive anticipate any changes in the foreseeable future? And if so, what might they be? I mean, if the answer is no, never, well, that's the end of it. But perhaps one of you, where are we on potential changes to planning?
So in a bit more depth, there are no changes, but you will have heard yesterday that the government were talking about the Trailblazer opportunity for Greater Manchester and West Midlands, and that would be further powers. We're hoping that we're going to be next in line once that has gone further. But to be honest, strategic planning has been paused. And it doesn't look like it's going to be coming our way anytime soon. I don't know if Ben, if there's anything to add, but no, unfortunately not.
Thank you, Chair, but no, nothing to add.
If you were asking for them, what would you propose? What would be your ideal devolution of greater planning? What control do you think the Command Authority could usefully apply?
Thank you, Chair. As it doesn't seem imminent, I haven't given it much thought on planning per se, because I work collectively with the other leaders. They have their own local plans, they have their own planning teams. I would say that the planning departments are stretched at a limit, and we know that developers are always telling us that planning teams don't work fast enough, but that's always about resources and dotting the I's and crossing the T's. But if the committee would like to know more information, I'd be very happy to assemble a paper regarding planning specifically, and happy to talk further.
Me?
Chair, thank you. So only a couple of things to add to what the Mayor has indicated. At the time that we were putting together the devolution deal, the government was interested in what the planning role might be for Metro mayors, and you'll be aware that Greater Manchester do have powers to produce a statutory plan in that regard. For us, that was never a priority because our local authorities already work together. We use the duty to cooperate as a means to kind of work across boundaries, and we did talk at the time about the benefits of having a non-statutory kind of infrastructure plan that would look at major areas of investment and how you join up in infrastructure, particularly where it crossed local authority boundaries or impacted on more than one local authority. As I said, that was working well under the duty to cooperate anyway, something that of course is under review as part of the previous proposals for the planning white paper. So I think from our perspective, it's that ability to make sure that looking across West Yorkshire as a whole, we can join things up where that's sensible rather than anything statutory.
But just to add that working in partnership with our local authorities, there doesn't feel like the need, for example, for a mayoral development corporation, to impose planning on partners when, as we had to assemble at speed investment zones for the government, we do work really well and closely together to support partners in their planning ambitions and their investment opportunities. As you'll know, with the statement yesterday, those investment zones that we spent time on are now scrapped.
Yeah.
Just on the issue of powers, and I think I asked something very similar last year, but it's still an interesting question. Clearly, the different mayoral authorities have different powers and different arrangements. Are there any powers that you don't have at the moment which you think would be useful to deliver the sort of ambitions for West Yorkshire you're looking to do?
Thank you for that question. And deepening those powers is, I think, the priority rather than further powers. Saying to government, please stop with the beauty contests, give us the opportunity with long-term funding to deliver on our ambitions. And I wrote to Michael Gove, who's now back, which is welcome, in DLOC, and we asked for 4 things in that letter, which was greater cross-Whitehall engagement with that particular focus on a single multi-year funding deal, direct with Treasury, so it gets us out of that funding bidding round, rather than negotiating with individual departments led by individual ministers who might have their own agendas and their own peccadillos. So ending those beauty contests and competitions, and deepening devolution rather than new powers, but deepening the powers around skills, innovation, transport, climate and culture. So, for example, we want to go faster in to tackle the climate emergency, but we have to bid in to beauty contests for where we can put EV charging points and so on. And also resourcing our local authorities. We can't be transformational here as an MCA if we have local authorities that are hanging by a thread, unable to deliver what the public need, and particularly facing what is going to be an incredibly tough winter ahead. They need certainty, a long-term proper funding, and recognising, we need government to recognise that role that councils play, and those are good public services, and funding councils properly so that they're not having to bid to build leisure centres, when you'll all remember back in the day, this was the bread and butter of local authorities, that they would build these new libraries and leisure centres, and now we're having to bid in to central pots. And when you think every pound of tax we pay, 6 pence comes back to us. You know, I think it's only fair that we ask for more for our regions. And I do welcome the further devolution across the country, further mayors. I think it's good for democracy. And, you know, I look forward to welcoming more mayors. But that's the deepening rather than more powers.
Ben, you want to expand on that?
I don't think I've got anything to add to what the Mayor said, Chair.
Anybody else any questions on the broad, on the future of the broad mayoral powers? Because I think the return of Michael Gove is good news. I don't know the man personally, but he seems to have a commitment to it that not many ministers have shown in the last 3-4 years anyway. So,
Chair, I guess there's just one thing to say, and the Mayor mentioned it, but I'll kind of draw it out a bit more, which is the thing to watch over the coming months will be the outcome of the 2 trailblazer deals that the government is agreeing with West Midlands and Greater Manchester, because they've been asked that very question, Councillor Winard, that you've asked in terms of what will be your next steps in terms of powers. The point of powers are no good unless they come with the appropriate funding to make them deliverable is absolutely core to that work. But that's where we're looking, because I think the intention is that following those trailblazers, those are the kinds of powers that would then be rolled out to combined authorities, more combined authorities more generally.
And just to add as well, that of course it's not just about statutory powers, but it's about that soft power of convening and bringing people together, and whether that's around the Fair Work Charter, whether that's convening businesses and groups to support economic development, whether that's, I was very privileged to be on our first ever trade mission to India, and we were able to come back with 1,000 jobs and tens of millions of pounds worth of investment. That sort of power of having a voice and a champion for our region. Also, since I was last here, Chair, I've been elected as the chair of the M10. There are 10 mayors in England, and it's a real privilege to be the chair, nominated by Andy Street in the West Midlands. So I hope that gives an indication of the cross-party working that we're able to deliver. And using the power of the M10, able to, with all the chaos we've seen in transport recently, convene an emergency meeting of all the northern mayors, and we represent 9 million people, to make the case that government have to intervene in this chaos, and request a meeting with the minister, which is forthcoming, and we'll be meeting the Transport Minister on the 22nd. So I do feel that the powers are almost above and beyond the statutory powers. It's about coming together, and particularly as a strong northern voice and being a voice for the north, I think it gives us greater leverage and makes us more heard, I think, in government. And there are other mayors around the country, because they are potentially a little bit more isolated and don't have that convening power across a larger region, that they don't get as consistent a hearing from government. So I do think the collective strength of the northern mayors is also a great gift.
The population of the north of England is twice that of Scotland, isn't it? And you wouldn't think so, the attention that north of England gets sometimes. When you do report back, or did you do a report to the full combined authority on stage of your discussions with the other mayoral combined authority leaders?
I'm sorry, Chair, what's the question?
When will you report back on that? Is there a facility, an arrangement whereby you'll tell us what was discussed at the meeting, or tell the full authority what was discussed at that meeting and how far you've got and what the priorities for that meeting are?
The M10 is very much an organisation that's in its forming stage, and in particular there are there are issues in terms of what the role of M10 is, in terms of how, on what issues do the mayors want to collaborate, what kind of officer structures need to be put in place to support them, relationships with other organisations such as the LGA in particular. All that's being worked through, but I think your comment is a really sensible one, and we could certainly look as to how we can best report that back to West Yorkshire colleagues.
If I may just say as well that the M10 was set up in response to COVID. So it was set up with a particular remit, and then there were obvious, really great outcomes of shared best practice. So as the chair, I'm hoping to deepen that understanding so that we can all learn from each other. And I value the Mayor of West Midlands and Greater Manchester sharing their conversations with government on the Trailblazer scheme, so we can learn from them when we're making also our pitch to government, so to consider us for the next round.
Thank you. Jeff?
Thank you, Mayor. The issue of soft power and partnerships, which you've already alluded to, are clearly an important part of your role and ability to influence events. You mentioned the return of Michael Gove to be the relevant Secretary of State, but more generally, what is your relationship like with the ministers in the current government, albeit I know they've changed in recent weeks? And how do you go about influencing, trying to put West Yorkshire's case to them in a way which you think might actually help us here in West Yorkshire?
Thank you. Well, the problem is I make friends with ministers and then they're gone. And then they come and then they go. And the ministers that I've known from when I was an MP, and I'm delighted that they've got this position in transport, because actually I know her really well. We've had drinks together and we can speak candidly and we are potentially friends, and then they're gone. So we have to start all over again. It has really held us back, this chaos. It's held back relationship building with government. The psychodrama that's been happening in Westminster is also very distracting for ministers. So, for example, Grant Shapps, when he was a Transport Minister, lobbying and campaigning for Boris Johnson to remain as Prime Minister, his eye was completely off the ball in transport, because how can you do that job and completely focus on politicking? So we've just got on with it. We've just thought, well, we'll roll up our sleeves, we'll get on with our own levelling up, we'll deliver for the public. And a perfect example is the Mayor's Fairs, which I hope you all share that it's a positive move to reduce bus fares at a time of economic crisis and cost of living crisis. So our enhanced partnership, we pushed that to the absolute limit. It's very innovative, the way that we got to the £2 fare, so much so that government were contacting us saying, how did you do it? And then subsequently, months later, they've introduced their £2 fare starting in January for 3 months. So I would say, Chair, that we're actually leading the way. We're leading government. And I've always said that mayors are an opportunity to push government into the right position, because we will be delivering on the ground at speed, because we know our communities. We can be innovative, we can have pilots, we can show government how you deliver at speed for the benefit of the public that we represent. But it has been not easy. I can tell you that my team are now brilliant letter writers, because there's been letters to different ministers with different tones and different asks because of the different characters. I am hoping for some stability, but yet again, there may be in 18 months, 2 years' time, another change again. So you won't be surprised that I'm also deepening my relationships with Labour colleagues in anticipation of another set of changes.
And I suppose linked to that, your profile as West Yorkshire Mayor, clearly a lot of work's been done in the last year or two, media-wise, comms-wise, to build your profile. Do you think that's been successful? Do you think it's helped to improve your impact? How would you assess the sort of profile building work which has been done over the last year or so?
Well, as you know, that when we started out, we had a very young comms team, young in working with a mayor. So I think over the last 18 months, we've had LGA peer review on our communications team. That's been incredibly helpful. We've been very lucky that we've attracted a new head of press, Nick Appleyard, who has worked with Rishi Sunak, who's relocated to our region, and he's implementing changes in that team. But I think, as the only woman Metro Mayor in the country, I think there was an automatic profile. And obviously, in the way that I came into politics, from creativity and into after Joe Cox was murdered and so on. So there's an automatic bit of interest. But what I'm hoping to do is to deepen that profile as a respected spokeswoman for our region, as a voice of our region, as a spokeswoman for the M10, and also globally. And part of that was why I was pleased to be invited onto the Harvard Bloomberg mayoral program, which is mayors from all over the world meeting. The philanthropy of Mike Bloomberg is extraordinary, taking mayors from all over the world to New York, where we are learning about leadership and so many other things as well. But being able, as part of that program, to be chosen to go onto a data track program, which is a year-long program that is not just for me, but for our colleagues in transport, to deepen our understanding about the data required for mass transit and for bus reform. So I would hope that it's a local profile, but it's also national, talking to ministers and so on, but globally as well, that we want to raise the profile of West Yorkshire, of course we do, to those investors who are, in fact, on the trade mission, as I mentioned, to India. Everyone I was speaking to, CEOs, entrepreneurs, saying that actually we've fed up with making relationships with government because of the churn. We are making relationships with mayors, and I see that as a real opportunity for our region, not just for India, but elsewhere. Ben, did you want to come in?
Thank you. Is it okay, Deputy Councillor? So just a few things. In regard to your earlier points, and particularly the Mayor's points about the churn of ministers in recent months. Of course, we at an officer level maintain relationships with officers across across Whitehall, both in central government and the local teams, in order to maintain those relationships while there are changes to ministers. I'd also say this is where the production of documents such as the West Yorkshire Plan, which is currently being developed, and its daughter documents, particularly the West Yorkshire Economic Plan and the next local transport plan, are really key, because they set out kind of for the record what the priorities and ambitions of West Yorkshire are. And then that feeds into the Mayor's profile, which I think we see as extremely important. We are definitely wanting to put West Yorkshire on the map. That's good in terms of international recognition. It's good in terms of government looking to West Yorkshire as a place it can try new ideas and learn from us, and also helps cement our record in terms of delivery cost effectively and efficiently. So for all sorts of reasons, it's really important to us that that the Mayor's profile, both internationally and then right through down to communities that, communities of voters, that's maintained.
Thank you. Could you just say that our communications officer used to work for Rishi Sunak? Yes. Right, come. How recently is this then? I mean, has he moved from Downing Street to Wellington Street?
Yes. I would say I think that's all credit to everybody here at the Combined Authority, placing us as and making everyone aware of this is the place you get things done. This is the place where you can just leave behind the sort of politicking and get things done. And I think Nick brings an enormous amount of experience, particularly from the Treasury. And we are, having spoken to HR recently, attracting a greater number of young people into the MCA, which I think is a really good thing. Young, very smart graduates with a couple of years of experience who see MCAs as the place to make change.
Thank you. It's a reflection on me, but I didn't realise that was his background. That's very encouraging, isn't it? That's all. Yeah. What's that? Hold on.
Sorry, I was going to.
You're miles away.
Yeah, just to follow up very, very quickly on a few occasions in the comments, both the Mayor and Ben have talked about international reputation. You talked about the India trade delegation and the Bloomberg thing. Are there other international links planned, other international trips on the agenda in the coming months?
Well, health tech is something that we excel in, and there are opportunities around health tech. But if it's of use, we could furnish the committee with planned symposiums and so on. The Mayor doesn't go to everything. Some of our colleagues are real champions for our region in their area of expertise. So I think it would be wrong of me to say what's going on, because nothing's confirmed currently.
Yeah, we have an ongoing rolling programme of trade and investment activity, and probably the simplest thing is to share that with the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think I did wear my white trainers in honour of the Mayor being here, and she's let me down today, I'm afraid.
It's raining, so I've had to
So let me down badly. I'm probably in danger of deviating from this scrutiny, but I just wanted to come back to your point on the Mayor's fares. I think you made a comment this morning about throwing.
Yeah, that really is deviating.
It is, but I think it is. I think it is. I think that my point.
Channels.
Follow my point here is I think what we need to look at when we do projects such as this is unexpected consequences, and that's my point. Is when we come up with such schemes like this is look at that. In particular, I use public transport 5 days a week, and the reliability on longer journeys has dropped off since the introduction of that fare against shorter journeys, and I see it every day. That the bus companies are routing resources one way. My point, Chair, is when we look at things, we need to, when we review them post-event, we need to be looking at the unexpected consequences of those events, rather than necessarily. I'm using that as an example for going forward. Okay.
You can reply to that when you go to the Transport Scrutiny Committee. Life's too short. No, we want to get home before dark. No, life's too short for that, isn't it? Exactly. Jane says that's if you get a bus. You couldn't get one this morning, no, right? David.
Thanks, Chair. Morning, Tracy. Good morning. Funny, there's a different change in situation this morning, isn't it?
Good to see you again.
Yeah. In building up the links, then, obviously you referred to the recent visit to India. So hopefully, therefore, there will be more visits after that to other parts of the world in order to create inward investment into our region. Will there be a model in order to ensure then that there's an equitable distribution across the region when this inward investment comes in? So will there be a plan? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. And it's something that we discussed, I think, at Wakefield Full Council about the equity of sharing good news and investment across the region. And as I said last time we met, that every business is different. Every business needs a different skills pipeline. So, for example, Langthwaite in Wakefield will need a different set of investment and skills to potentially emphasis, which is about AI and cloud-based tech. But rest assured, this is the power of a mayor for a region, that I am the voice and the champion for the whole region. And whilst Leeds is, of course, global facing, it has a Premiership football team which people seem to recognise and know. I will always be the champion for our brilliant regions, and whether that's culture in Halifax, the Peace Hall and the investment that they're making there, whether that's the investment that's going into Wakefield and Huddersfield, the manufacturing specialities, etc., etc. But also that's why I've made it a mission to work with our local authority leaders so we can get a West Yorkshire plan for our clustering expertise, so that when Denise Jeffries goes out, she can talk about Huddersfield, and when Shabir Pandor goes out in public, he can talk about the excellent opportunities in Wakefield too. So we have a really unified vision of what we want for West Yorkshire going forward.
No supplementary? Okay.
Could I just add to the Mayor's comments? So, so whenever we receive inward investment inquiries and those companies indicate the kinds of sites that they're interested in, we always provide a range of sites across the whole of West Yorkshire. The challenge, of course, is that the companies ultimately make the decision. So although we may steer and guide and encourage as best we can, ultimately these are private sector investment decisions that we're seeking to shape.
But if I may add, Chair, just to say quality of life is increasingly important for companies when they're seeking to locate. So the cultural offer is also important, and it's a greater priority than even good schools. So the work that's going on in Wakefield, in your cultural offer, makes Wakefield very attractive, whether that's the Hepworth or the Sculpture Park or the heritage renovation and building. So rest assured, I'll be the champion of Wakefield.
Paul?
Thanks, Chair. Hello again, Tracy. It's only been a few days, hasn't it? So, and thanks again for coming to Home Valley South. It was amazing. Yeah, I think
Solomon is a young leader in the making.
yeah, well, it's all down to Moses. It's obviously Moses' son, so he did a great job. Sorry, everyone. That was a youth event that we had in Home Valley South that the Mayor attended. Did really good, fantastic job. It's great hearing the work you're doing at the national level and international level, and the partnerships and that how you're using soft power. Be very interested in hearing your thoughts about how you develop that within West Yorkshire. My sense is, I've been a councillor for a fairly short time, just under 4 years, and I still see even within Kirklees a lack of feeling of being a part of a broader alliance, if you like, in a sense. I mean, from councillors. I don't mean in the sense of the way we work at a leadership level, So be really interested in understanding how we can develop that further and actually use that amazing power we got across West Yorkshire as well. So just interested in your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not quite sure the sense that you're saying that you don't feel part of something. Is there an example? Are you excluded from events, or you don't know about things happening or funding streams, or just a greater clarity so I could answer better?
No, I actually don't think it's that. I think that communications works well. I think we're aware of things. I think it's a sense of belonging. So it's much more of feeling part of a broader alliance. So it's quite this is quite a difficult question because it is all about soft power. It's about culture. It's about behaviour, isn't it? Where as local authorities, we're very used to, ploughing our own furrow, making things happen. So I still think that there's work to be done in developing that overall team and getting that down to the grassroots, if you like, as well. It's certainly not about communication or understanding any sort of funding streams, etc.
Chair, could I take that away with me so we could maybe have a further conversation about whether that's about engaging with councillors more regularly, or making sure that events move around the region if you don't feel that that's happening. But I could easily reflect on that out of the committee.
Good point. Does anybody else feel like that? Is that a common view, do you feel? You like to know more about what's going on in this building?
Chair, I'd suppose echo what Councillor Davis has said, in the sense that lots of councillors in their own authorities are very much beavering away on their local issues, and to some extent the West Yorkshire Combined Authority seems quite remote and quite separate, and I'm not sure that, though it's obviously different with the leadership, I think perhaps more work needs to be done to engage with normal councillors so that they realise exactly what's going on and can engage in the activities of the authority.
I would love to see some recommendations. I'm very happy to look at those, but also please invite me. I'm very happy to come to events, to come to community campaigns with you. If I could also say, the Mayor's Community Safety Fund is a great way for you to promote your community to that £8,000 funding pot. And Kirklees, for example, and actually Wakefield, they don't always have enough submissions for me to choose. So there may be an opportunity there for us to work a little bit harder, connecting your community groups, the people that you're representing and supporting, with these funding streams as well. But if you were happy to identify some recommendations, I'd be pleased to look at them.
Ben?
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to the Mayor's comments, I think this is a really important topic, and I think there's two separate issues. One is, in particular with regards to each local authority, what's the actual level of partnership working that's undertaken? And then separate to that, how well do we communicate that is occurring? And how well do we recognise where the combined authority, and in particular the Mayor, is playing a role in in those local successes or local issues? And I think we can provide some more information on this, but we have a number of council portfolio holders that are on our committees. We engage with lots of councillors across West Yorkshire. We've got over 20 officer partnership groups working on a variety of different topics. The challenge that creates is making sure that within authorities and between authorities, the communication between all those groups is operating effectively. I suspect there are a lot more officers being supported by funding from the combined authority than you probably recognise. There's a lot more activities that are being delivered at a community level that are being funded by the combined authority than you recognise, and we probably need to work harder to make sure that that's transparent to the committee.
Okay, did you just Mr. Go, that there are funds available through your office which are not tapped into by local authorities? Did I hear that
Not by local authorities, by community groups, but then they're nominated and identified by councillors. So groups that have early intervention, so for example, young people maybe at the potentially going into crime, to a music group or something that could be identified as someone that could benefit from the £8,000 from the proceeds of crime money?
I think it would be interesting now. We'll have a one-page summary of that and how we apply it and what the rules are. But we don't want somebody to spend hours on it, but if you're going to have a summary of what the restrictions and the rules are about that fund, I think we'd like to be reminded, shall we say.
Be very happy to do that. And
don't just spend all day on it.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mayor. And I don't think we've had the pleasure of meeting before, sadly. So I haven't made it to Bradford yet, I think just the comment I wanted to make was that we've heard quite a lot about, or we've heard lots of things, but we have heard about your international, national, and your sort of Westminster focused, and the M10 group, and achievements and contests and areas of work which you're rightly proud of. But it strikes me that and I think some of the comments that we've had earlier might go to this, is that there is a tension between as the importance, if you like, and the national and international notice of the combined authority, and particularly the mayoral role there, is increased. There's a tension between that and the grassroots individual local authorities and the groups and people within the local authorities, and to a certain extent perhaps the identity of the combined authority as a whole. And I'm not saying that you're not trying very hard to balance those things, but I think it's something that we should be conscious of, that the better, in a sense, the combined authority gets, the bigger it gets, the more it becomes a national, international body, and there's a tension between that and its role as a collaboration between a number of local authorities and the communities within them.
If I may just mention the youth group in Home Firth, that was a perfect example of community engagement and sharing the understanding of what devolution means for young people. The work that we're doing, putting the safety of women and girls at the heart of the police and crime plan, going along to self-defence classes, talking to women who have really benefited from that, and also the public engagement, where we've had the widest consultation we've ever had for the police and crime plan, and I was very much embedded in that. And following on from that, yet another very wide-ranging, widest than we've ever had on transport, the Mayor's Big Bus Chat. And I was out at bus stations, as you know, I travel on the bus anyway, but doing some of the surveys, talking to community groups, disabled groups, campaigners, disability campaigners. I see absolutely your point. What you may not be seeing is the stuff that happens under the water, because that's not the stuff that necessarily gets the public profile or the national media. The tension is absolutely right, but that's where the joy of the job is. That's where you can actually balance those two things. And I hope, whilst we don't always get everything right, I really enjoy that public engagement, because how do you lead unless you live like the people you represent?
Thank you. We must move on to inflation, and it must be the most critical subject facing the authority at present. Presumably budget planning has been affected by inflation absolutely fundamentally in regard to gain share and borrowing and everything else. What are the assumptions behind your budget planning for 23-24? And do you have inflation assumptions or central government funding assumptions?
Thank you. I mean, inflation has been off the scale, and we've had to look very carefully at our planning for the future. But for detail, Chair, would you be happy if I passed over to Angela so she could give you the absolute clarity, and then happy to take supplementaries?
Oh, there are going to be, yeah. Angela.
Thank you. That's a very big question you posed, and I think it'll be no surprise to anyone around the table how difficult this year has been. I think the Mayor's been very clear about what she wants us to achieve, And I think it is our task is to go away and see how we can deliver in the current climate. There's clearly inflation affecting many areas of our spend. One of the pieces of work we have done recently is to review the capital programme, and there's a paper coming forward to the next Combined Authority meeting identifying some projects which it is proposed we and our partners put on pause to make sure we have an affordable capital programme for now. Clearly, the Mayor will continue seeking more funding from government. We're not getting anything additional to make up for the gap in the, we've been given set of capital funds to deliver certain projects. We haven't been given anything supplemental to that, despite many of the letters that the Mayor referred to that she has been writing have covered this topic. So we are having to try and cut our cloth accordingly. We are modelling different scenarios. We are doing our best to ensure that our biggest area of spend, which is transport, the payments we give to bus operators to make the bus services happen. We're trying to do our best to try to find a way to make sure they can continue to happen, because you all have heard the Mayor speak many, many times of how critical it is that people can travel, and the Mayor's Fares is one example of trying to make that more affordable for people using additional government funding we've received. So I think it's about we're trying to deliver the services we need to deliver with demonstrating the value for money as best we can, using all the funding we have available to best effect, including, and you touched on it before, I'm sure you'll come back to it, as this committee always does, the gain share funding and how we've been able to use that, and the Mayor has repointed some of that to assisting in the cost of living crisis, for example.
Thank you. That was remarkably succinct. Thank you. Ben, briefly, and then Samantha, and then David. I think you've got an interest in the subject.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. Just to add, so we have been through already a mid-year review of our budgets, because the cost inflation pressures have been evident over the course of this year. And you know, those effects have been felt through the supply chain, of which we're a major buyer, as you're aware, wages and energy costs. So we have looked at how we can manage our budgets internally to make sure we remain within budget this year. Next year, as you would expect, and as Angela's kind of hinted at, we do make inflation and cost increase assumptions. They're one of a number of kind of unknowns in setting next year's budget, alongside the certainty of certain government funding streams, where there's still a lot of uncertainty about whether they will continue next year, and we wait for individual departments to come forward with what the impacts of yesterday's financial statement will be on their decisions. So we're in that process at the moment, and one thing that Angela and I are in the middle of at the moment is developing different scenarios for what might happen to the economy, so that we've tested our budgets against those different possible outcomes.
If I may add, Chair, as well, that of course there's a strain on our budgets in that we have to support our local authority partners and the people they represent. So in the last Combined Authority meeting, we signed off a multi-million-pound package, which was a cost of living crisis package, with £3 million going to our partners for warmth, food and support with mental health, and another package going to businesses to help them green their processes so they can save money on energy, but also turbocharging the retrofit programme, so up to 3,000 homes that will be warmer and also have cheaper bills going forward. We have to act. We're waiting for government, and we can't wait. So there is that pressure on those budgets, and of course inflation means that the gain share every year that goes by with these eye-watering inflation double-digit numbers is worth less and less to us. So it is an enormous challenge, but I would thank the local authority partners who've doubled down on identifying where there can be projects that can be paused, so we can deliver those projects that we're already in agreement with, or they're on site, and then hopeful for more funding streams to fund those projects. So to pipeline a project is not easy for a local authority, but I'm enormously grateful for the partners.
Where does this £3 million come from then? From gain share?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Tracy and Ben. I'm very, very pleased to be here today after Wakefield, and thank you for coming to Wakefield at last after 18 months. So the impact of inflation and economy on budget and gain share is nothing new. So last year, our assumption for inflation was way off, so underestimated by a long shot. Let's accept it. And we are talking about 2% of the pay rate for public sectors being set aside, which is nowhere near. So we're talking about nursing staff asking for 17.5% of pay rates this year. But I can tell the committee that I mentioned once before that today is my 20th years anniversary of my company. I incorporated 20 years ago on the high street of Wakefield. But last year in September, I told my staff, you're going to have a 9% pay rise. And they said, what? 9%? I said, yes, by April next year, you will not thank me. So if a small business has to budget, has to have the foresight as such, how can the combined authority get it so wrong? And the budget itself just not account for the double digit of inflation. But of course, and you just mentioned about double digit at the moment, yesterday that has been confirmed by the autumn budget itself. So what is the overarching principle for this year's budget? I appreciate that you like to work with the alignment with a local authority, but what is the principle of the budget for this year in consideration of inflation, please? Thank you.
Well, congratulations on your foresight, and I'm sure your employees are very happy with that. But no one could have predicted the war in Ukraine and also the impact of COVID. But I would just wonder if Angela could talk through in more detail about the thinking behind that.
Thank you. Budgets are always very difficult because it is about forecasting the future. And as the Mayor said, no one saw the war in Ukraine coming, sadly. So we tend to try and base our budget assumptions on what the local authority family is doing so that we are consistent and we are all taking the same approach. It means we all then face the same shared problems to solve. So the 2% pay award in our budget for this year was in line with the 5 West Yorkshire local authorities. We all acknowledge there's a risk because nobody knows what that pay award is, and there's clearly a tension between wanting to ensure our staff are paid properly for the work they do, but balanced against affordability. So it is one of the areas that everybody's wrestling with. I know we were challenged by this committee on more than one occasion, certainly by the Deputy Chair, about what would happen if the pay award was higher than expected. And my answer then was we would have to look to fund it in year, whether we'd look to reserves, and we have been able to. Unfortunately, we've been able to fund it primarily this year through staffing vacancies. I know we have a session next week on workforce issues, but we have had a number of vacancies which have given some savings which have helped this year. Going forward, we are still planning on a different range of assumptions because nobody knows yet how inflation is going to settle down, and that's part of the challenge. So I'm in frequent conversations with the West Yorkshire Finance Directors where we're all going to settle on a shared set of assumptions and then do our best to manage through it, which is ultimately all we can try and do. There are certain areas of budgets which are affected differently. So we're treating salaries one way, we will treat energy a different way. And then we need to make a call collectively on RPI and CPI and where we think that might go and whether we've taken a huge hit this year, but does that settle down in the future? And that's particularly accentuated on bus, where there is no real measure of how the cost of bus tendered services move. We're doing a lot of work behind the scenes to try and get something balanced for next year, but recognising a huge amount of risk in all of the assumptions we're putting together.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to Angela's comments, as I said previously, and Angela's mapped out ways that we do look to manage our budgets in terms of planning going forwards, for which scenario planning is a key tool in that. The things I would say is that we moved very quickly when it was when the scale of the issues were becoming apparent. We're one of the first mayoral combined authorities to do the level of depth review into our capital programmes in the country, and indeed other combined authorities have asked us, how did you go about that process? Because as Angela and the Mayor have hinted, we have taken steps to ensure that we've taken I think about 250 270 million pounds of cost out of a 1.4 billion pound programme, but not by taking those projects completely out of the programme, but by taking them to a point where those projects are ready to go when more funding becomes available. So we've not overreacted, but we have been prudent and have been sensible in terms of making sure that we take forward that which is deliverable and delivers the most benefits, and bring to the next phase of their development projects that are still needed across West Yorkshire, but we will need further funding. Our funding is often quite constrained in terms of how it can be deployed. And so for that funding stream in particular around transport infrastructure, it's fixed. And so there's a limit to how much freedom of movement you've got in terms of how you can save costs within those kinds of programmes.
Thank you, Chair. The Mayor has pledged for this coming year that there won't be any mayoral precept increase. So, but what about the long-term plan? Do you have any long-term plan for the, because of budget pressure, that to increase the precept for the WYCA mayoral authority? Thank you.
This is something that is available to the Mayor going forward, but it's not something I currently want to implement. And I do know that already local authorities are being forced by government to raise council tax by 5%. At this moment, we are on our way to deliver on our transport pledges. The mayoral precept can only be spent on transport, so it has to be for something very clear. In Manchester, Andy Burnham has raised a precept for free travel for young people. Last summer, we reduced bus fares for young people, and we've seen footfall come back to pre-COVID levels. So it has to be for something related to transport, and currently I'm not minded to implement it because of the cost of living crisis and because of where we are in our planning and our development, but it is something that is available to mayors.
Thank you. David first then.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think I'm going to have to do a little bit of somersaulting here now, because an awful lot of things that I wanted to sort of talk about. I know my colleague has also jumped in on the mayoral precept, because I think going back to conversations I think we were having 2.5 years ago, was it? And I can remember on one occasion sort of counting up how many different local taxes there were. And I think since then, I think I've actually identified another one, which comes in particular on people who live on housing estates, which have got sort of management contracts. So I think it is something which is particularly important in terms of where we go for the future. And quite rightly, you picked up on what was said yesterday in the budget statement, and of course the OBR has said, and I picked up last night, and I might have dreamt it, I don't know, I hope I did, but I fear I didn't, and that was that they are building into their assumptions that 95% of councils will go. I didn't dream it then.
No, you didn't, that's right.
That makes it even worse, then, doesn't it? That sort of the stress that's going to come onto it. So having said all that, and therefore the pressures that are on local councils' budgets, and I think we all know around this table the pressures our own individual councils are on, because I think we're all sharing figures when we have meetings with sort of cross-border meetings with colleagues. To what extent then would you see in the future ways in which there could be some alignments in the budgets of the 5 councils across the district in order to ensure that there is, if you like, an attempt to sort of support projects that are taking place, to put new projects into place, so that there's, am I saying here, a pooling of budgets between the councils and the combined authority?
I think that would be for the leaders of the local authorities to comment on. We have our funding streams which are specific to projects and opportunities given to us by government. I think you'll know that only last week 2 Conservative councils said to government they were going to go bankrupt. So local government is in absolute crisis after decades of underfunding, and it is incredibly tough for local authority leaders at the moment, choosing massively unpalatable choices about swimming pools closing or sure starts and children's centres closing. It is very, very difficult, and I'm doing all I can to support them and funding projects that are still going to have that strategic growth, because how on earth can you tackle this economic crisis without investing for the future? This is, unfortunately, is like managing decline from this government, that we don't have that forward view about how in London, when there was the last economic crisis, they built Crossrail, creating jobs and investment, and now we have a government that has withdrawn the previous Prime Minister's decision on Northern Powerhouse Rail, which would bring £30 billion worth of growth to our region, 130,000 jobs. There's an opportunity right there for us to develop income streams and look to the future. I can't answer for my local authority colleagues about pooling resources. I don't know if there are examples elsewhere across the country.
Chair, thank you. So there are examples where we pool resources already. For example, the main way in which our funding works is that we secure funding from central government, and then the combined authority acts as the mechanism through which it's then allocated to local authorities, often within the use of a common assurance framework to ensure value for money that we then have to report back to government. However, often for those projects there's an element of local contribution required, and sometimes local authorities provide that themselves. Sometimes they do that through us, and on the transport fund in particular, because of the scale of that, we have been using some of the transport levy to prepare for the point at which we will need to put in local funding as well. So pooling does work, but not to the extent I think that the Mayor's just been outlining.
Thank you.
I think you're quite right in saying what you've said, Tracy. I'm really pleased that you've said what you've said, because I think that is quite reassuring in terms of where the future is going, and in fact as how the role of the MCA develops over the next few years or so. So yeah, it's a welcomed answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Chair. We've talked a lot about the issues that we're facing, and we're all facing them, as you said, Tracy, in terms of local authorities and trying to balance sometimes things that absolutely don't balance. One of the things certainly I know as a company member for corporate, I'm trying to do all the time is to look at what is it, what's our priority as an administration, what's the golden thread, if you like, that's running through what we're doing, despite everything that's going on at the moment. So just be interested from your view in terms of the current pressures on delivery and programs and projects. What is it that you see as a priority, and is there a golden thread or golden threads that run through your approach?
Thank you. Yes, there is a golden thread, and that's equality, diversity and inclusion, because you can't level up without making sure that everybody gets the opportunity to flourish and have a decent standard of living and access to opportunity. So you'll see that we've announced the recruitment of our inclusivity champion, part funded, 50% funded by the health, by ICS, which is really good because I don't have powers over health, but I see across our region a 10-year life expectancy between, for example, Ilkley and Dewsbury. A boy born in Ilkley is going to live 10 years longer than a boy born in Dewsbury. So I don't have health, but what I can do is working with partners, try and bring in the levers to make change. And so that comes through the whole of our organisation. We've seen really great change in our organisation, even in just the last 18 months. But every project that we fund, every opportunity, EDI is at the heart of that, because we want to make sure everyone has all the opportunities. It is not right that 1/3 of all children in West Yorkshire are living in poverty, and the outcomes for them are, they're going to be held back. So that's our golden thread.
Thank you. I have a well-developed cynicism about gain share, which I don't restrict. I can assure that gain share is going to be used for the purpose it was originally intended. It has not been used as sort of backstop to topping up budgets that are no longer adequate for what they were originally predicted to be for. if it's you or if it's Angela or Ben, but Gainshare had its justifications when it was established, and just tell me it's not been diluted.
I mean, Gainshare, the decisions around the use of Gainshare isn't just in my gift. We are a partnership. It's six leaders making the decisions around Gainshare, but I don't know if you wanted to come in, Ben?
Thank you, Chair. I suppose the most succinct way to say that is that at the moment, Gainshare is part of the devolution deal. It was 75% revenue, 25% capital. It is there for purposes to promote economic growth, and that's been deployed both to develop revenue programs. In particular, originally those programs were focused on the post-COVID recovery, and we are pivoting some of those programs to be more focused, as the Mayor has said, on cost of living crisis. The early years of Gainshare are focused on those programs to help the businesses and the communities in West Yorkshire. At the same time, some Gainshare funding is being used to develop capital project pipelines in the way that I was describing with Councillor Harvey, to make sure that we have projects that are available to go should funding become available, and for which there's then a choice about how do you use the future years of Gainshare to be deployed on those capital projects if there's no other funding around. There is a ticking time bomb with Gainshare, which is that it's not index linked. So it is £38 million a year, but that obviously decreases, and the higher inflation, the more quickly that decreases. So there's a rationale for using future years' revenue Gainshare to borrow to release capital funds in the early years, but we have to have the project pipelines ready to go to be able to spend that money, and that's some decisions that the leaders and the Mayor will face over the coming months.
If I may just add as well that I think maybe you're reflecting on the £3 million for the cost of living crisis package, but you will understand that we can't grow our economy if there are people who are starving. We can't grow our economy if people can't turn on their heating. And we know with cold homes, more people die. So it is an emergency. And all of the leaders agreed that we had to intervene as best we could. We weren't sure what government were going to do. I was campaigning for the rise in universal credit in line with inflation. I'm really pleased to see that from government, because food bank organisers are telling me they have now a new cohort of user, and that is families in work with children. And it's those children that it is my responsibility and the leaders' responsibilities to protect their future.
And ours too. We don't try and avoid that. So what have we spent Gainshare on this year then, or in 21-22? Is it something you've available?
I can go through the CA budget meeting. Would that be helpful?
Just tell me the top big 3 or 4 largest projects.
21.5 million on good jobs and businesses, 21 million on skills and training, 12 million on places, which includes housing and flooding. We thought we'd get money from government around flooding. We haven't had a penny. 40 million on the climate emergency. You'll know we've committed to zero carbon by 2038. And we're moving at speed on that with a programme, solar panels for schools, so that they can lower their bills, but also tackle the emergency. That's just one example. 58 million on transport, and the majority of that is the capital element of Gainshare we were just referring to, committed to supporting Transforming Cities Fund, and 11.5 million for culture. All of those priorities come to the Combined Authority, which, as you know, is quite unique in the country, that it's cross-party, and those priorities have been signed off and approved.
That adds up to a lot more than 38 million, doesn't it? How many years Gainshare is that? So that Angela's bursting to tell us.
Well, I was going to say that's over a 3-year period. The other point that I would add is that all of the projects and programmes that come forward to the Combined Authority for decision have been through the assurance framework, which is a requirement of the devolution deal, and which assesses all of those projects against both their value for money and the outputs that they'll deliver.
And if I may say that some of our colleagues get frustrated at the assurance process because it is enormously rigorous, because we want to make sure that we do our own assurance and that government then don't want more details. So we are very, very thorough in those decisions.
We applaud that.
Thank you, Chair. Probably, I don't know whether, Tracy, you know it exactly, but it is still a very big budget to spend, at multi-million pounds of budget. So can I just ask you, do you know the rules of the contract procurement rules of the combined authority or the mayoral authority at the moment? So what is the threshold for legal advice? For example, do you have a rules for £25,000 above or £100,000 above for the full legal advice? Thank you.
Well, there are delegations and limits for sign-off, but if you want to pick that up, Angela.
Thank you. Yeah, we have published on our website our contract standing orders, which set different levels of procurement at which we allow managers to procure that themselves. There are different levels of sign-off. It's all set out in contract standing orders. I'm happy to share a copy and explain those delegations. But in effect, the higher the value, the awards are at director level. Further down, there are different tiers of management who can accept those contract awards. The tender process goes from quotes for very small, lower values, going through open tenders to full what were the old style OJU level procurement. So there's a full set of rules. Everything we do follows those procurement rules, and we monitor that. So it is open competition for most of our work, with everything published online for any interested suppliers to see and bid into.
Okay.
Sorry, the procurement bill is going through Parliament at the moment, so I just wonder whether the local, the combined authority will be following the white papers published soon. Yeah.
Yep, we've been waiting for some time to see exactly what is going to change. We are absolutely monitoring it. We are always compliant. We always seek to be compliant with any national law relevant legislation. So we will be updating our contract standing orders as some of those things become passed into law.
Thank you.
Councillor, are you talking about the control subsidy bill? Yes. Yeah. So we have fed into the consultation for that bill as well.
Thank you. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to go back a bit and just seek clarification and reassurance on a couple of points, and I know Ben has partly answered this, in particularly what the word pause means. Because if I look at, and I use a specific example where a project is to be delivered in various phases, and if I look at the A629, and that's the one that has greatest impact upon me and my ward, A629 development. So we're in the middle of phase 2, and whilst each individual phase has unique benefits associated with it, the benefits grow exponentially as future phases are brought in. And in this case, we're going to be pausing after phase 2. So there's 3 more phases due on that one. So I just want clarification on what the word pause means, because I think if we speak to every single one of our residents, their definition of pause will be, it ain't going to happen. I think that's almost a guaranteed if we speak to residents. So I want some real clarification on what that word pause means. And the second part is I live in Halifax, I work in Huddersfield, and in speaking to people in both Halifax and Huddersfield, I just want they are concerned and have been, and I've raised this topic on a number of occasions as of other councillors from Calderdale, that I just want some reassurance that there's some mechanisms in place that the likes of Wakefield, Kirklees and Calderdale are not pushed behind the cities of Bradford and Leeds when I would say the dam is burst, but I don't think it is going to be burst. I think when the taps start opening up again, and that there are sufficient mechanisms in place that, for want of a better word, the easy don't take over the important.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. So good question. The pause that I refers to means, so we have a set of projects in programmes. So in the case of the A629, those the different phases of that project, which are all discrete and individual projects, and I can come back to that in a second, that they're all in that programme. What I mean by pause is we're providing enough funding to make sure that that project gets to one of the key milestones in its development, be that outline business case or full business case. And that means that the project is in effect ready to go as soon as available funding can be found. It's still in the programme, so there's no decommitment from the project from the partner's perspective. It's simply a question of we need to make sure that we've got the funding for that. We often find ourselves being asked by government to find projects where government has got some money that they want to spend rapidly, and this approach of making sure that we've got projects to a given point in our assurance framework, such that they're ready to go, will really help when the government next comes forward and says, what projects have you got that can meet this criteria for the latest government initiative? So we think this is a sensible approach, and partners have agreed what those projects should be. But I should stress that it's not a decommitment for those projects; they remain in the programme. The other thing I'd say is that each project is treated on its own merits, and working at a West Yorkshire level, we don't have allocations for individual local authorities. It's based on the merits of the individual projects. But of course, officers and local authorities, everybody keeps an eye on is every local authority getting good value out of the combined authorities funds. So that's an ongoing process that we continually review.
Thank you. And coming back to procurement inflation, and colleagues have deviated perhaps from the remit of this particular scrutiny committee, but going on to the governance function. Within the procurement process, and I appreciate some of these will be commercially sensitive, so probably can't be disclosed in this forum, but may be useful for members to see. What are the mechanisms of assurance around contractors and some of our procurement partners we're procuring from artificially increasing their prices above and beyond what the actual real impact of inflation is? So basically, so they pad their bottom line. What mechanisms do we have in place to assure that there is good value for public money and that they're not unreasonably asking for more within those contractual confines that they've agreed to? Because I appreciate a lot of procurement contracts will have an inflationary element built into the system just in case, but how are we making sure that they are not taking advantage of the current situation to the detriment of the people of West Yorkshire?
Who's going to take that? Angela?
Yeah, I'll take that. Thank you. We have a professional commercial procurement team who set out with the procuring manager the way in which those contract bids will be evaluated. The evaluation is done across a number of different elements. Price is part of it, and hopefully we get a number of bids, and the process will help eliminate where through the scoring process, the evaluation process, where there are artificially higher prices. No, but that is the mechanism we have that it is competed. If every contractor puts in a high price, then we have some mechanisms where we feel the price is excessive, where we can withdraw and start again. Many of our contracts have inflation written into them, which is then based on whatever measure is deemed appropriate when the contract is entered into. So it is often as simple as RPI or CPI, in which case we will inflate the contract by that value on the anniversary date as required.
More specific question, and I'm sure we're finding this in all the relevant local authorities where contractors are coming and saying, we have this inbuilt mechanism already, however, it's not working because of the cost situation we're in. And what I'm asking about is not what we build into the contracts, but from an assurance and corporate governance perspective, what processes do we have in place so when those ad hoc conversations happen within contract, that actually there's a mechanism in place which means that actually we're making sure there's value for money for the local taxpayer?
No, I understand that. In that element, if a contractor comes back to us to ask for a change in price, that's a contract variation, and again we have a set of processes to agree contract variations. I'd have to go and check how many, if any, we have actually agreed. We have taken quite a robust line. Contracts are priced with an expectation of upward and downward movement on them. And so we can't just be expected to respond to the downside, because there's probably also an upside sometimes that we don't get the benefit of. But happy to bring something in the future if that would be helpful for the committee.
No, I think that would be useful for committee members, because again, it's just that having that reassurance that the actual corporate governance functions of the combined authority are actually protecting the very limited budgets, maybe millions, but still very limited budgets that you have at your disposal. And I think for the committee, having that assurance, even if it's in a more private session, so because obviously they're commercially sensitive procedures and applications of those procedures, I think would give assurance for us to then go back to our constituent authorities that actually the combined authority is doing everything it can do to protect from our contractors, again, potentially taking advantage of the situation for their own benefit.
Just to supplement that, I think you said it happens very rarely, but I think we'd like to know, without knowing the figures perhaps, but how many times we've done that in the last year?
I will find that out. I'm not aware of any that have happened on any significant scale.
And,
if
it's
at all.
insurance we'd all
So
like.
I need to check figures.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Wright. So I guess just to add to Angela's comments, there's the processes that happen between the contract manager and the contractor, and the contract manager obviously has to be satisfied, and they often work quite closely with the contractor so they understand the cost base, and it's the contract manager that then brings that cost change, as Angela said, into our formal corporate governance process of cost escalation. And there's thresholds around that in terms of the level of increase that you would expect. Angela said that there are some examples where we see that we'll bring some more information. I would say that what we're seeing is we have the contracts that we run for kind of capital programs. We then also have a slightly bespoke set of contracts run with bus operators for the provision of tendered services. They're run in a slightly different way, and it's in that market where bus companies have cited a lack of drivers or increasing fuel costs, and the contract constraints become challenging, and we have seen bus companies hand back those contracts because they can't make them work, for example. So there's some examples we can give of those as well as those more standard capital projects, but rest assured that we do ensure that any claims and changes are genuine.
Thank you. Wow, that's quite useful.
Yeah, it's really follow on from what we just discussed. My experience in the private sector, I worked for two sort of quite large global IT services company, and I saw the development of clients demanding open book accounting and defining margin levels for contracts. Is this something that we look at as part of the procurement process? It may not be open book, but in terms of defining margins that we would agree are relevant to particular contracts going forward.
I'll have a go then, Angela, correct me if I stray too far. So we can bring some examples of that. We do that. It would take us into the bounds of going over that line about what's appropriate to say in public.
Yeah, sure. I understand.
We do it.
Be happy with that. Yeah.
Just on the inflation theme again, and its impact on Mayor, your specific priorities, and I'm just wondering whether the current rates of inflation have put cost pressures on some of your specific priorities, which is effectively going to delay them being fully implemented, or perhaps you having to make difficult decisions in terms of prioritisation, in a sense, which of your are some of your priorities more important than the other?
Thanks for that question. And it does give me the opportunity to talk about what we have already achieved. We're 18 months in, so we're halfway through. So the pledge for 1,000 jobs for young people in the green sector, we're there at 1,000 halfway through. These are jobs that have been helped to be created by the Combined Authority, working with and identifying businesses that could have apprentices, who could have jobs for young people. So I'm really pleased about that. The challenge of the 5,000 affordable homes and sustainable homes, a real challenge. We look like we're going to get there, but with COVID and with rampaging inflation and also to some degree pressures on recruitment in construction, it is incredibly challenging, and I want to applaud the teams that are trying to deliver at speed those housing pledges. I'm challenging every team in a half-time team talk where we wear the football strips and eat oranges, where we look at where we've got to, what the challenges are, what the opportunities are to go further. I'm really pleased that in policing and crime, even though government have underfunded the police in the last round of funding, giving new officers, the allocation for new officers, only 21,000, which doesn't even cover their uniform or training, we still look like we're on target, slightly over 750 police officers and staff. So that's really important to me. You'll have seen the Mayor's Fairs and the franchising process. We're now we're underway with franchising, and we'll be making that decision in government time scales by just before the first quarter of 2024. The culture, that creative new deal, we're definitely underway with that, with the Mayor's Screen Diversity Programme, which I signed off in week 1. That has now had a second cohort come through, and the first cohort, I met them 100% employment in the sector. These are, they were manifesto pledges that we've been able to really hopefully get there. However, we don't know what the next 18 months is going to look like either. So there are things that maybe are further down under the banner headline of the manifesto pledge that we will have to maybe rethink or realign or, reprogram. But I'm very confident that the 10 manifesto pledges will hopefully be achieved by 2024, May 2024. And I'm particularly proud of the manifesto pledge of putting the safety of women and girls at the heart of my police and crime plan. We have an outstanding police force in West Yorkshire who have come with us on this journey to make West Yorkshire the safest place to be a woman or a girl. And the Venn diagram of my responsibilities as the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Mayor, I've been able to be creative. So, for example, being able to talk about safety of women and girls, and also with our BSIP money, we've allocated 20 PCSOs that will be on the bus network and in bus stations, in the same way you have transport police. So I'm able to draw down from various responsibilities to deliver in a creative way on some of those manifesto pledges. But it is a challenge, and I really want to thank the officers at the MCA who are just working flat out to deliver for the public and for the people of West Yorkshire who put me in this place.
Thanks for that. Just a point of clarification then. In terms of priorities within the 10 pledges, are some of the priorities more important than others?
To say all 10 have equal weight, I would try and persuade the committee that they absolutely do, but there are elements where it's movable. So supporting businesses and skills, for example, there are many opportunities there to deliver on that pledge. So whether that's bringing in international inward investment, which you've, as I spoke about previously, whether that's supporting, widening the opportunity for free training. Because of devolution, I'm able to say that free training is available not just for those below the minimum wage, but below the real living wage, opening up skills training to more people to give them the opportunity to earn more money. So it is open to a little bit of variety, but things like the Fair Work Charter, that was a pledge that is underway, and we will be delivering that. So there are absolute bullet points, but 10 pledges, but I have 700 members of staff and colleagues with me on this journey to deliver for the public.
Thank you. Okay.
Thanks, Chair. And I guess this follows on from the question about the prioritisation of mayoral pledges through the cost pressures that we have. I specifically wanted to ask about the commitment to tackle the climate emergency and protect our environment as part of the mayoral pledges, and I think it was number 10 at the bottom of the list. But I just wanted some reassurance that that was still a key priority, and that was taken into account through all of the other spending priorities that you have.
Thank you for that. And you'll know, because we've spoken about this, how important tackling the climate emergency is. You can't talk about levelling up if people's businesses and homes have been washed away. So allocating £40 million, whilst it is a drop in the ocean, actually, for what we could achieve if we had more money, I hope that gives you reassurance that that pledge will be definitely protected, because we have that money to deliver on a pipeline of schemes that the Climate Committee have just signed off on, a substantial part of that programme.
Any other questions on inflation? Which assumptions are not in print anywhere, are they? The assumptions for 23, 24, and not anything we can read about yet today?
Yeah, we'll be bringing, there'll be a paper coming to the Combined Authority on the 8th of December that will set out the draft proposals that we're going to take forward, and we have to go into more detail. We've got a detailed session planned later in December, where
Are we invited to that, or?
there's a corporate scrutiny session arranged especially to go through the detailed budget issues. So you can pick up any of those questions there with you.
Within 18 months, the problems are all going to go away, because all local authority central government assumptions are based on in 18 months all the problems will have gone away. It's been on for 20 years to my knowledge. Any other questions about inflation? No, right. Question on the equality, diversity, inclusion. Have we got an inclusivity champion?
As I mentioned, Chair, it's out to recruitment. It's a very particular job, because it's somebody that understands community, is trusted by communities, but also can work in health and across local authorities. So it's out to recruitment. If you know anyone who would be good at the job and has a passion for equality across our region, please do put the advert under their nose.
Could I just ask, in terms of that role, I mean, you've set out in very general terms the aspiration. What exactly will that person do, and how will their performance be, I suppose, evaluated?
Thank you. This role is really important to me, because it's somebody that's going to take the lead on inclusion and equality and opportunity for people across West Yorkshire. It's unfortunately in West Yorkshire we do have difficulties because of areas of deprivation are greater than in some other areas, which means we also have poor health outcomes and health inequality. So it's somebody that's going to bring skills from, there'll be a managerial background potentially, somebody with skills from health and also EDI. It is a unique person, and so that's why we've left it slightly flexible, whether they want to work 2 days a week, 3 days a week, and so on. And we will be building on the skills and the trust they already have in the region. But when it comes to auditing, I don't know, Ben, if you want to come in on how we audit success. I mean, the health inequality will narrow and social mobility will widen, and we will have matrix to hold them to account for that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can add any more to
I was expecting that one, weren't you?
That's exactly how it will work, yes.
Thank you.
It's nice to have somebody's got to try and assess it objectively, though. Well,
Thanks. linked to this, be very interested in your views around community wealth building as an approach that can really help us in terms of reducing inequalities and dealing with inclusion issues. That's the question, really.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there something that you'd like to draw my attention to that's a good example?
Well, I think certainly, I think if we look at the experience of COVID and the pandemic, and we looked at the companies and the sectors that were hit, I think what we noticed were the large, and particularly I'm talking services industry, the large companies who were really hit badly and withdrew their businesses and services, if you like, whereas smaller independents, cooperatives and mutuals seem to be much more resilient. So it's linked very much to that approach of creating economic opportunities within communities. So yeah, that's really the focus.
Thank you. As a Labour and Cooperative Mayor, I really do share those values. And that's why it was important to me to understand, for example, that in Bradford, we have more entrepreneurs than anywhere else in West Yorkshire, potentially because Bradfordians feel that they just have to get on with it and set up their own business because there's no opportunities for them to get in and get on. So the Enterprise West Yorkshire £6 million pot, I was able to say that 50% of that will go to women, 20% to people of colour, and 10% to those with a disability. We've already smashing those targets. So it's a 3-stream programme. You've got an idea. Is it anything? You've got a business that's under 12 months old and you want to move it on, or you've got a unicorn idea. So that's one way that I'm hoping that we can support enterprise in West Yorkshire. We've also got an accelerator fund of 20 million for SMEs to get support for. But I would say when we were talking about prioritisation, we haven't done as much work on social enterprises and cooperatives as I would have liked. What we're now looking at is our growth hub managers, our business folk that are embedded in our communities, that they will get more training on supporting people who want to set up co-ops. We've got some great examples in West Yorkshire, and I've spoken at a number of events to support their ambitions. But I think putting more money in people's pockets and communities is really important. That's why I'm committed to the real living wage. That's why the Fair Work Charter was set up, so that people had proper pay for a decent day's work. And also opening up opportunities for skills, especially around digital. We have far too many citizens in West Yorkshire that have no skills, not even being able to have an attachment on an email or be able to get on Zoom. And we know so much of society is becoming digital. We're ending up with an excluded cohort in society, and that means that they are left behind. And this is a real opportunity for us to give them those basic skills for work in programmes that work for them, because not everyone can go to college for a year because they have to juggle caring responsibilities or work. So to have those boot camps, short courses as well, I think is really important. But to your point, I think we can definitely do more. But can I just make a bit of a song and dance about the Green Valley Grocer in Slough, because that's a brilliant co-op and we want to see more of them across the region.
Just to add to what the Mayor's said there, the role of the local authorities is really important here. As a mayoral combined authority, we're not looking to build a kind of a new infrastructure, a new network of relationships. Local authority officers and those that work with already have those community relationships. So in these kinds of for community wealth building and similar kinds of initiatives, it's very much around the provision of funding for those officers to then ensure that they're delivered in the right way, that work for the communities and build community wealth in the way that's envisaged. And we're seeing that through Shared Prosperity Fund, the Mayor's Cost of Living Fund. We're seeing that in the way that we deliver skills funding as well.
If I may just mention, Chair, though, the Shared Prosperity Fund is less than European funding, so we are trying to do the same, if not more, with even less money. So it is incredibly challenging for our partners.
let's debate Brexit then, shall we? No, we don't. No. Thank you. Just tell me where we are on the living wage. I think we're moving towards it, or we're trying to encourage it. Where are we? Are we?
We are a real living wage employer.
We've just come to the end, and I want to a very specific one-sentence answer questions. But do you want to tell us how it's different after 18 months from what you thought it was going to be when you started, or what you thought last time you were with us? I mean, you're not allowed to use the words COVID and Ukraine, but apart from that, how is it different?
The more I do it, the more I love it. It is an extraordinary job to be a mayor and a police and crime commissioner. It's incredibly challenging. I'm glad I don't have small children. My children are grown up because I have no life apart from my job. But it is an enormous privilege to represent the region where I was born and raised and to make a difference, because as a member of parliament in opposition, it is incredibly hard to change people's lives in the way that even in 18 months we've been able to do.
How's it different from what you thought?
To be frank, Chair, I had no idea what it would be like. And I often do jump into things with 2 feet first, and work it out as I go along. But it is an incredible job and a real privilege.
We've had prime ministers who started like that as well. The final question, Councillor Harvigan.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that 18 months into MCO, you have a wonderful team working with you. So if you think about the KPIs, if you look at one particular flagship project, for example, if I talk about Ben Houching, he would be saying the Teesside Airport or the Freeport. So what is your flagship project? Thank you.
I feel sorry for Ben Houching because he's talked up the airport and yet it's an absolute crisis. But I would say so far, and we're only 18 months in, so far, being able to reduce the cost of bus fare has been something I'm proud of, because we led the way. We were very determined. It had to be £2. There was, it could have been £2.50, but we really made the case that in a cost of living crisis to get more people on the bus. And we have seen bus use rising, which is helpful. So that's something I'm proud of. But also the way that we've worked with partners. I think for some mayors, it is really difficult to keep those relationships. And I think it is down to my colleagues and the other leaders, but we are friends and we are all focused on a better future for West Yorkshire. And that relationship building is not always easy, but I'm really pleased that we can say that we all share the same values.
Thank you. Just 2 very specific questions then. When I said I was coming here to speak to one of my colleagues on council, just to meet the mayor, I was asked to ask, how do local authorities and parish council access the Rural England Prosperity Fund, which I had never heard of?
It's an additional pot of money for the Shared Prosperity Fund. It has no, that's correct, isn't it? It has no extra management fee, so we're going to be managing that. It's a small amount of money, but I don't know if you, Ben, you want to give more detail.
How do they access it is the question.
Yep. My understanding is that there'll be a call for projects, and there'll be suitable kind of marketing to make sure that people are aware of it, to those that need to be aware. The call hasn't launched yet, no. The thing I would remind everyone is that rural businesses can still apply for the normal Shared Prosperity Fund. There's no rule that says they can't. This is just a specific fund that is only available for businesses and for others in certain parts of West Yorkshire designated by central government as rural.
Have there been any discussions anywhere about transferring the fire and rescue service to a mayoral combined authority?
Yes, there has. Government has suggested that they're going to insist that we take on fire and rescue. We are at a place where we have a great tripartite relationship as it is I don't currently feel it's necessary because we have a great relationship. I would also say to government, don't give us more responsibilities with no funding to do it. So I would make the case that if it's comes from government and we need the extra resources, because I know really clearly how the responsibilities for police and crime and holding the chief constable to account, the costs and the time and the effort and the resources that takes. You can't give us another responsibility with no extra resources.
Where do I see evidence of the government insisting? I'm not saying they're not. I've not heard of it.
We
Where do I
got a
pick that
letter.
up? You'll send us that, will you?
Apologies, it's the white paper. It was in the white paper.
Oh, I see.
And the letter followed the white paper.
Is that public? I'd like to see that as well, please, and on behalf of the Fire and Rescue Authority.
So we can certainly share that. I think it's fair to say that the government was floating the idea and was indicating that there might be certain areas where there is alignment between fire and rescue and the mayoral authority areas that they might want to push this first, and that I think we're potentially one of those areas. The other thing I would say, just because I've been reminded of it, in my last answer on the Rural Prosperity Fund, that fund doesn't start until the beginning of the next financial year, so there is time for that bidding process.
But also when we get things from government, we don't always know that they're going to really happen. So we're not sure that this is regarding police, fire and rescue. Obviously, as we saw with the investment zones, not everything gets to be delivered.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. It's been educational and interesting, for me anyway. It's most important. Nobody was burning to ask some questions that we've not given opportunity. Thank you. Thanks to Ben and thanks to Angela for turning up and contributing as they have. Are you free next November the 17th?
I'm free for you, Chair.
So thank you very much indeed, and we'll move on to the next standing agenda. But we do appreciate your contribution. Thank you. We move on to item 7. Hannah, can you remind us what we've got in the programme for the next few months?
Yes, Chair. So our next meeting is 20th of January. We've got staffing, including recruitment and retention, the draft budget for 23-24, and an update on the assurance framework on the agenda. Thank you, Chair.
That sounds plenty, yes, thank you. I mean, the budget could take the whole meeting, couldn't it? Anything else people want to talk about, or that they informally?
Chair, could I just remind members that there is going to be a specific session on the workforce issues, workforce challenges per se, which is going to be an online meeting, which is going to be on the
Going to be
week today, which members are. I mean, it's a working, effectively an informal working group session, and members are, if they can, are more than welcome to join. But obviously, I accept that not everyone's going to be able to do so. So I think, and I think we want to look at some of the workforce issues to try and get a feel for what the issues of priority should be for the report of on the full session, 25th of November. Yeah.
Thank you. The last item is for information corporate update, which we have a extremely brief paper at the back. I think we've covered these things anyway, haven't we? Anything we ought to add, Hannah?
Not from me, Chair, thank you.
Is anybody else any questions that you've not had the opportunity to raise this morning? Nope. Close the meeting. Thank you.